Hey everybody, this is the first podcast of a new podcast that myself and my good friend Preston are doing together called Mad Blocks. This podcast is really kind of like our goal of this podcast that we're thinking about is that what we feel the space is missing in general is that it's a podcast that talks in depth of how these systems work, what's a good project, how it functions, the pros, the cons, what's good, what's bad, what's ugly, and really kind of rip it apart and show kind of the inner workings of these things. This is not for high levels of thinking. This is not for like investors in a traditional sense. This is for people who actually want to understand the inner workings of a particular project, and as we kind of have a methodology of breaking it all apart and showing people, explaining to people how things work. But myself, if you don't know who I am already, my name is Chad Barrowford. I am the technical lead on ThorChain, which has been around for 3-4 years now, which is a really great project. And then with me is my good friend Preston Thornburg. Preston?
Yeah, hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Preston Thornburg. I'm the co-founder of Upshield, and my background's in offensive security and trying to break all of the stuff that we'll be talking about over the next couple months. So,
yeah, awesome. So as I mentioned before, like what I feel like the industry is missing, or what we feel the industry is missing, is podcasts that go more into the depths, more into the details, more to technicalities of things and the implementation details, and not about just like shills and this kind of stuff. We're both kind of tired of seeing.
The shills are more fun though.
The shills are fun. You have to give it to them. Like, yeah, that's true. This is not a project you want to learn about the high levels of things and whether you want to buy or sell or whatever. This is not financial advice. We are not telling you that this is a good project to buy or a bad project to buy. It's not about financial advice or these kind of things. It's merely just an exploration and understanding of the inner workings of a particular project and why things work well or why things do not work well from our perspective.
Can we explore Pepe first and why everyone needs to buy that first? It's your starter part of your portfolio. It's like your starter pack. Everyone needs a Pepe.
How many Pepes do you got?
Dude, I have all the Pepes. We just minted some today. We've got our own new Pepe. It's like Pepe Turbo or some shit.
You gonna ride that one to the moon?
Yeah, always. Just make sure you jump off the rocket first. Don't pull a Terra. No one wants to do that.
That's good advice. Sound advice for the community here.
That one's for free.
Please DM Preston for more non-free investment ideas. Sure. Yeah. All right. Well, now that we kind of get through this is not financial advice. Let's talk about like what it is we want to do when we get into a project. Like, what are the things we want to break down? What are the things we want to talk about? And that kind of stuff. So any first thoughts that come to mind for you, or things you want to look at when you look at a project?
Yeah, my first question is always like, what are you trying to achieve and why? That's usually those are the most important questions. And if you can't get a great answer of the why, then like that seems to be 99% of the industry. So yeah.
And the why, oftentimes, like I hear people give me the why of their thing, and like a lot of time I'm just like, that doesn't make no.
Yeah.
No. That's making sense.
Yeah, it's like, okay, so here's how it's going to go, right? So we're going to take your Monopoly money, and then I'm going to take my Monopoly money. We're going to combine it together, create an LP pair, and then we're going to make new Monopoly money. So I think that's a really important question, which I know it's so simple, and maybe it even sounds ridiculous, but just the simple who, what, where, when, why. It's just so critically important in an industry that is unregulated, that just kind of is like the Wild Wild West, which is beautiful, but it also just kind of leaves you sometimes wondering of like, what are we really trying to build here? And have we kind of gone astray maybe? Or like, what are we doing?
Right.
So
are we just trying to create tokens that pump in value? Or are we actually trying to like build a tool that people can use that benefit their lives in one meaningful way or another? Like that's how I typically like to think about it. And I know you and I have talked in the past about how like people like overutilize blockchain for things, right? Like a blockchain is actually a database in its like fundamentals, like a type of database. And there's lots of databases in the world. There's MySQL and Postgres and Mongo and Redis and like CouchDB and there's like literally like 1,000 fucking databases that are sometimes forks of each other. And like a blockchain database is a very unique type of database. It gives you very unique attributes, which is really great. But one of those attributes that does not have the speed, performance, and a bunch of other things, efficiency, all these things. And so it's just like sometimes when you want to use a database over another database, you look at the attributes or the positive aspects of a particular style of storing and sharing data, and pick it based upon what your use cases are. So like, just because you're putting something on a blockchain does not necessarily mean that the blockchain is a really good use case for that type of data that we're talking about. So I feel like people get so confused by this sometimes. That's one of the things I would love to like kind of dive into more in the podcast and kind of like explain why these things are not good ideas to be used for a blockchain. These things are great. These things are not so great, and this is why. Yeah,
100% agreed. Yeah, and like I mean, even like not to jump the gun, but when we start getting into like use cases of why are we even using blockchains, and like what are the actual real world use cases here, and so far everything's based around money, which is great. What about all like if you had a network of decentralized entities and none of them trusted each other, what could you like? What sorts of railways does that open up that were previously technologically impossible?
Yeah.
I don't think that we've had people answer that question in a great way yet, and this is why you have just dog shit. It's just everywhere, right? It's just all dog shit. Like, where's the cool shit? Like, when is actual real world change aside from money? And I get the money use case. What about all the rest?
Yeah, I find this oftentimes there's a big like chasm between like people will talk about with blockchains you can do like X, Y, and Z, and then people are like I'm gonna build X, Y, and Z, but when what they deliver is nowhere close to what X, Y, and Z was describing. There's like a huge chasm between like what blockchain could do in theory versus what actually is being produced or made by teams and devs and across the sphere there. That's a huge chasm, and we're going to be diving into that like on a per project basis and explaining like why this does not actually achieve the goal that it's talking about that it achieves.
Oh, Chad, I cannot wait to talk about upgradable contracts in a meeting. I fucking can't wait. I really am so excited. Yeah, I have to come back to the States just to talk about that one. I can't wait.
I think that's actually a really good one because that's one that I think a lot of people, especially people who are non-technical, don't understand the risks of proxy contracts and why they're such a like that completely takes away from almost the entire idea of what the thing is trying to give you. And people have like a lot of people, like some people do, but a lot of people don't have any idea why that is. And then we can talk about why that's bad and then how to do that in a good way. Can you have a good proxy contract? Like how do you structure that? And why we even need proxy contract? Can you just write code and deploy it and then never be able to change it again? But what if there's an issue? What if there's a bug? What if there's an exploit? Which most likely 99% of the time, as we see in almost all projects in crypto, they've all had hacks from Bitcoin to the smallest ones. Like almost everything's been exploited to some degree, right? So it's just like it's a good we're gonna get into another episode another time, all this kind of stuff, but like that's a really fascinating topic that I think you and I are gonna like rip apart at some point.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
One of the other things we want to talk about for projects is about like tokenomics, right? I'm not personally big into like the tokenomics of how projects are started, like how much is minted and what team gets what percentage, although that is an important thing to ask when you're like looking to invest into a particular project. I'm more interested in like the tokenomics of like how the thing actually functions and works. How does the token interact with the system? How does it utilize to make the create the proper incentives to make the thing work in the way that it should work, and distill people trying to work against the system or against the organization, against a project. Bitcoin is a really good example of like how you can use economics positively with an asset or a coin, and there's other chains that do the inverse of that, which we can get into another time. Anything else I'm missing on the tokenomics viewpoint?
No, honestly, I'm stoked to get to learn from you on a lot of that. You are way better at that than I am, and so I think like having your Giga Chad brain like really dive into here's why these fundamental models are broken, or for me, what I'm much better at, I think, in my little wheelhouse is like let's get to the underlying assumptions here. Like we have this entire stack that's been built. But what are the underlying layers, and when they break, what are the redundancy layers, or does it just free fall?
Yeah.
So I think that's like, I'm sure we'll hop in and out of those conversations many times.
Yeah, I think that's why you and I might be hopefully good people to talk about these things, because I've been a dev for a long time, since like 2008. I got into crypto, 4 or 5 years ago. actually, you were one of people who actually introduced me into this space and got me. We were friends before all this stuff, and you got me into it.
I vaguely recall.
Yeah, so I to this day I always appreciate it and thank you for like kind of like turning my eyes to this industry. But like I've been building this industry for a very long time. I've been working on ThorChain for the last like 4+ years. ThorChain itself is like one of the oldest, most successful, and longest running Cosmos chains in existence. Like it's really been a long time, and so I've been building for a very long time. You have been like in security, mostly in offensive security, for like, I don't know, 10 years now, 20 years. I don't know how long you've been actually doing this work for, but like you've been breaking into like international banks and doing all sorts of fucking crazy shit. And so like you and I have such a great technical and depth of knowledge in our backgrounds that when we approach these projects and these ideas, we can share from like experience and knowledge. Not that our opinions are the end all be all. We're right about everything we say on this podcast. Obviously, that's not going to be the case. But we're just sharing.
On most of what I say.
And for sure, I will be incorrect like many a times as well, and I'll be happy to if people want to like correct things that I say or whatever, and because it gives me opportunity to learn and grow myself, which is really great, right? So this is why I think you and I are good to do this kind of talk and this kind of podcast, because we come from this experience, come from this knowledge, come from this space itself, both in the Web 2 space. We've both been building the Web 2 space for like a decade plus, and we've both been building in the Web 3 space for like, you know, for me like 4 or 5 years, for you probably even longer. So it's just like, you know, I think we're good position to talk about these things.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be a lot of fun. I very much look forward to getting called out by the community. I actually genuinely am excited for that. It'll be a good opportunity. I love learning from other people, and so I have my ideas, and oftentimes they come across as pretty crazy, or like you're not speaking the narrative. Like, what are you talking about?
Yep.
And so I think sometimes what I say maybe holds water, and I assume that I'm probably frequently incorrect as well. So.
But this is actually one of the things I really like about you as a person, is that you do have a very different way of thinking of things, which I think is really valuable in the context of like talking about this industry and this space. Like, you don't always align with every ethos of the crypto industry, which I understand and appreciate. And you and I can get into like the, you know, like the nitty gritty of like why you feel the way you feel, why I feel the way I feel. Then we can kind of like butt heads a little bit and kind of have a fun argument about it.
It's like a therapy session on Riverside.
Yeah. One of the other things we want to talk about with projects is about like infrastructure and decentralization standards, and like how decentralized is this project. And one of the things that you've talked about in the past with me, and which is a very good point, is about like people oftentimes forget about the infrastructure aspect to a project and how centralized or decentralized that component is. And that's oftentimes just kind of like pushed off to the side and like nothing to see here, nothing to talk about. Just focus on this like smart contract over here. And I think that's a really good topic to get more involved with, because oftentimes, as you've told me in the past, Web3 people never learn the basics of best practices that we've been practicing for like a decade or two in the Web 2 sphere, which is super valuable and super important. And then we get into Web 3 and be like, man, we don't need any of this stuff. Like, who cares about best practices? We just fuck it, whatever, right?
Why would you? If I can build a money printer in a weekend, why the fuck would I put in 10 years learning Web 2?
Yeah.
But like, it's kind of just like, you know, it seems to be just like a rolling image of my view on crypto as it is, like in its entirety. Is I think the potential is incredible, and the longer and longer I stick around, I do find myself asking more and more frequently of like, what the actual fuck are we doing? Like,
yeah.
And when whether it's like flaws in the Web3 and like the implementation of protocols and like contract volumes, whatever it may be, or whether it's on the Web2 rails, and as we were talking about briefly earlier, of like these underlying primitives, these layers below, right? And when those things break, something like DNS hijacking, and suddenly all of your users are signing contracts to some address that they weren't aware of, or there's so many ways to just completely wreak havoc nowadays that it's interesting, man. It's like, you wake up every morning, you sip your coffee, and you're like, is today going to be the day that you just fucking throw the coffee and you're like, I fucking quit this whole thing? Or is today the day that you meet the person and you have that one conversation with the dev who's like, how do I make my shit more badass? And you're like, let's fucking go. Like,
let's talk about that.
Let's talk for hours about that.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I would love the community who listens to this podcast, whoever that is, is to gather, and I think you're better at this by a landslide than me, is to understand the risks of the space more. Like so many people, like you were talking about DNS hijacking, for example, and like these other things. So like people are just so unaware of all the different ways they can get completely pwned or fucked. And a lot of the time it's just like really simple, basic things, and it's really easy to protect yourself against those things. But just people are just like aren't aware, or maybe they don't even care in some cases. But like I think that's going to be really valuable. I think your voice and your perspective here would be super valuable for the industry as a whole to learn more about how they best, what to look out for, how to protect themselves from certain malicious scenarios.
Yeah, I think one thing that would be really cool too is like there's a lot of people that have turned their entire lives into dedication to this one topic of like protecting retail. Obviously, I chose to go a different way after Coinbase. I went, because retail becomes a difficult market to win. But
for people who don't know, that Preston worked for Coinbase for a while as part of their security team.
Yeah. But one of the really cool things is it would be really fun to bring in teams that are building. So even though I have no relationship to many of these teams, like Phantom Wallet and the implementation that they've like rolled out very, very recently is fucking rad, right?
Yeah.
And you have like Trust Wallet, and you have all these guys that are like, hey, how do we go about notifying users before they do something stupid?
Yeah.
The thing is, that's all at the retail, all at the user layer, the application layer. There are many, many layers to the stack, and I think that that's kind of where, because there's no accountability, and hopefully I don't sound like I've already gone off the rails too early in this, but because there's no accountability in Web3, there's no incentive to do what's best by your users, what's best by your personal keys. And that opens up a lot of risk areas that if you're not looking past the application layer, you'll never see. Even getting into like multi-sigs and the implementation of multi-sigs and like these are all like, we could dive into those things, but it's I'm really excited to use this platform to enable teams that are also going as hard as they're going of making the place, making the space a safer place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Teams that are really trying to drive legitimate real world value instead of just like shilling some nonsense, right? Because today it doesn't matter since everyone's broke. Well, the people that didn't sell are all broke. But going into the next bull market, you're going to see the next wave of scams, and that's going to be really, really exciting to like predict of like, okay, if I was a bad guy today, what am I building for tomorrow?
Yeah. That's awesome stuff. I think that'd be fun to talk about as we get further down into the podcast. One of the other aspects that we would like to do as part of this podcast is to have a guest on. So when we talk about, say we're going to break down USDC, for example, right? We want to bring on somebody from the USDC community, hopefully somebody who knows what the hell they're talking about from a technical perspective, so that we can really dive into the nitty-gritty of like how that works. So when we talk about a project or review a project, you and I both want to do our independent research beforehand to the best of our ability. We're both very busy. I'm building many things in the space. You're building things in the space. So we don't have a lot of free time per se, not either one of us. But we both want to do our independent research beforehand, and then when we bring on do a podcast episode on a particular like project, we want to bring somebody from that community or that dev team or whatever it might be to be kind of play as to field some of our questions and dive into the nitty gritty, and so to make sure that you and I get an understanding that's correct. Because if you and I dive in independently and we learn some things and we got a few things wrong, we obviously don't want to mislead the our own community thinking about this thing about a project. So it's good to have somebody from that project to kind of help make sure we get everything everything correct and buttoned up. And so as often as we can, as people are willing, we're going to be inviting people on the show with us to kind of participate in the conversations and debates and conversations. But that's not always going to be the case, right? So we'll see. We'll do the best we can.
Yeah, for sure. It'll be some nerd out sessions. I'm really excited to get to learn from them because, like, dude, I mean, to be in the space right now, you have to be borderline savage to want to work until 4 a.m. every single day during a bear market, right? So the people that we'll be talking to, whether we agree or disagree with what they're building and why, they have to have hyper passion to be doing what they're doing. And my goal at the end of this is always just to go back to what are the assumptions of like, okay, they say they're building this and this is why it's safe. Well, what are the assumptions? What are the primitives below that statement? And it's very possible that we'll say things that are incorrect frequently, but it's also very possible that we'll identify things and, not to be a dick, but like, let's have an honest conversation of like, there's 10 projects that are doing the same thing, and they're all doing it in this flawed way that does put user funds at risk, and I want to know why. And like, I think that that's a valid question to ask, and it's very antithetical to a lot of the narratives in the industry right now.
Yeah.
And I don't mind if I'm the demon. Like, it's cool. Like, I just want to know the answer. That's all.
Yeah, I think you and I align so much on this topic. So, like, people should know before they come on this podcast as a guest that, like, this will not be all sunshine and butterflies up your ass, right? This is an honest conversation. We will be as objective as we can be, and have a healthy skepticism towards every aspect and component of what it is we're talking about to the best of our ability. And so we will challenge you. We will ask you tough questions, and don't expect it all to be easy. And I think Preston and I will, have no qualms or hesitations around, keeping it real versus keeping it, shilly or moony or whatever the fuck the term is that people would want to use for that. Like, let's break it down, man. Let's fucking get real.
At the end of the day, it's all about just knowledge, right? And so there's that saying, like, knowledge is power, and empowering us to be better at asking better questions, but also empowering the users of this community to have a better sense of, like, okay, what am I actually doing when I do this thing? I think that that's really, really important, and I think it'll drive tremendous value. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, that's at a high level, that's this is the first episode just to talk about the podcast itself and what we're planning to do with it, our kind of vision, what this will hopefully become. Our cadence will hopefully be every 2 to 4 weeks come out with an episode. It's not like an everyday thing or something that's very frequent. We want to do a deep dive and do a good job on each episode, so we have to kind of spread it out a little bit longer. Not to mention that Preston and I both have, like, jobs and, very busy with our own independent things we're building or working on. Any final thoughts that you want to kind of throw out before we call it an ending to this episode?
Yeah, I mean, like, 3 high-level items for me of the whole reason I'm doing this is that, 1, I'm really, really excited to get to meet the guests. I want to understand, like, who are they as a person, what are they trying to build, and why are they trying to build it, what problems are they trying to solve. And I'm pretty confident that as a result of this process, I will become more bullish on the industry, of hearing the story behind the person that's building the thing, because building is really fucking hard. Yeah. For anyone that hasn't built, there's probably a gap in appreciation there, understandably, but, like, it's really fucking hard to build. Part 2 is I'm really, really excited to get to learn from you. You have a lot of things that I don't have when it comes to, like, knowledge of how these intricate little systems work, the work that you've done on ThorChain. I know there's a lot of lovers, a lot of haters. I don't care about either of those things. I think that the underlying mental cycles that go into building a system like that is really interesting to me. Mm-hmm. And it makes me kind of rephrase of, like, before you ask a particular dev team a question, of let's go back to what is the knowledge base that I have. And I think going through this process with you will be very, very beneficial to me in understanding, becoming a better question asker, right? Yeah. And then the third part, the part that I'm most excited about, is really the listeners of the show, and are they finding value, or what is their immediate feedback to us? You and I are going to make a lot of mistakes, probably me more than you. Certainly saying controversial things.
We'll see about that.
Yeah, we'll see, right? This could end up becoming a tale of the tape that, like, we flip, right? Of, like, I was supposed to be the bad guy and you become one, so now I have to be the good guy. Which could be really funny.
Good cop, bad cop scenario.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we have to have balance, right? And so I don't always want the guest to be the balancer, right? Because that would just be a shitty fucking podcast to go on. Of, like, hey, I want to go on there, so I just get yelled at for fucking, 2 hours or something. But I'm really, really excited to get the feedback from the community, because there's I live in the security bubble. I live in an ecosystem, in an eco chamber of why doing these things is insecure and puts things at risk. But the simple truth is that there's the rest of this little ecosystem bubble. And while I may disagree with a lot of the components, they might be very correct on a lot of them. And maybe I'm undervaluing those particular aspects. And so I think it'll be a really cool learning experience for me to just become better at talking, listening, learning. And obviously, anytime I get to chat with you, it's always fun. So, what about you?
I think that's a really good point about, like, of being open to talking, listening, and learning. And not just to be like, let's be offensive as shit and just, like, grill, but be objective, be listening, asking good questions, not just accepting and moving on, but really kind of challenging points that are being made to make sure that we understand and not necessarily, we don't have to agree with what they're saying necessarily, but just at least understand where they're coming from, right? I think that's a very valid thing.
And what if we help a project? What if we put just one or two little seeds in the mind as they walk away, and 3 weeks later, like while they're at a pub or something, like, oh shit, I should fucking do that one thing, right? Like, what if we actually like indirectly cause change? How cool would that be?
Hey man, that'd be great. I think hopefully we can. I think for me, what I'm most excited about in terms of like that concept is like, if we, by driving into the inner depths of these projects, if we can just by walking through it each time with each individual project, help to kind of like educate the industry who's maybe not as technical as you or I, or doesn't have the experience that you and I have, but like educate them on the process that we go through to break down a project so that they can start through that process themselves to some degree to better inform themselves or learn how to like to validate or invalidate a particular idea or concept. And of course you and I would be willing to like just jump on and do projects, but there's like 1,500 different projects or whatever the fuck the number is now, and obviously we're not going to do all of them, especially when, you know, things that are complete shits from the get-go are like obvious scams we're not even going to waste our time talking about probably, but like, you know, like I think that's really good, valuable, is like hopefully people can learn from how we talk about things, how we dive into things, and listen to the guest explain their answers and how well they explain their answers, and like do they even understand their own implementations, because sometimes that's not always the case, right? And like that would help their community understand their own project to some degree.
I can't wait to chat with someone that just blasts the fuck out of Thorchain. I'm very
Well, to be honest, like I don't really want to talk about I work on Thorchain, I work on Archeo and other things, and I don't want this to become some sort of like shill podcast for me and my projects or the things that I'm working or building on. So like I actually might be avoidant to talk about Thorchain, or avoid to talk about Thorchain's competitors in some sense, just because I don't want it to become like, you know, Chad the Thorchain guy and blah blah blah. I want to be like Chad the you know the builder, right, talking about projects and kind of leave the work that I do for the most part. Well, obviously we're going to mention from time to time because it'll come up in conversation, but like this is not like a shill podcast. But I would actually, to be honest, this is like one of the reasons why I wanted to create this podcast with you, is that because like I've been on a lot of podcasts, I've been asked a lot of questions, I've been interviewed many times by many people across the industry, and to be honest, I wish people would press me more on the thing. Like I did a podcast not too long ago talking about a thing. I don't want to like dox that the interviewer, but like they had no interest in talking about, like they want to know what, like at a high level, what does it do, and like how do I buy it, and like this thing, but they had zero questions on like how does it actually work, does that make sense, is this thing actually decentralized, like they had no questions about like the actual like meat of it, and they only cared about like the shill kind of concepts around the thing. And I was just like, why am I even on this fucking podcast? Like I don't want to get on the thing and just fucking shill. Like it's just not what I like. I like people to ask me tough questions about Thorchain or about Archeo or anything that I'm working on or building on, because I spend so much time and energy trying to perfect the designs that I'm working on, and I put a lot of pride and energy and thought and focus into making sure that the implementation is like as close to beautiful as I can possibly get it. Nothing's perfect, of course. Everything has flaws. Everything has, you know, points of failure. Like nothing in the world is perfect. But like I spent so much time working on these things. I wish people would ask me more so that I can share why this design is so, you know, elegant in the way that it's accomplishing the goal that it's trying to accomplish. But that's what I want to do for other people, at least, and their projects. Not so much. I don't need to interview my own project. That'd be a bit silly.
Yeah, I just think what would be really, really funny, it would personally may actually make a life top 10 if someone came on and you hated their project after doing your own independent thing, right? And then towards the end, he's like, all right, dude, now I get to interview you. And he just like, lights you up. And he's like, let's talk about this, and let's talk about this. And I'd be like, dude, I'm just going to sit here and just drink White Claws. Like, that sounds rad.
Do it, man. I'm like, you know what? I'm always open to answer any questions about Thorchain in general. This podcast is not really for that particular purpose, but people want to ask me questions that can. But like, I'm always open. Hit me on Twitter. Hit me on, you know, Discords. You got a question? Happy to answer it. I try to answer as many questions as I possibly can. I get a lot, so I mean, I don't, it's not necessarily all of them all the time. But like, I do feel very good, very confident about the design we've done. It's not perfect. I will be willing to admit where things are flaws or where things are, are pain points. I'm not like some people where it's like everything is perfect and nothing can ever go wrong. Like, that's obviously not the case. But anyways, happy to do that. Happy to do it.
Yeah, it'll be fun. This will be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, man. I think that's it for the season 0, episode 0, whatever you want to call this. We joked about calling it Ahoy Hoy, which was the first word you're supposed to say when you pick up the phone. I think it was Alexander Graham Bell.
And that originated in which year, Chad? When was Ahoy Hoy a thing?
Oh, what year?
Yeah, give us. You're like a Rolodex of knowledge. Like, give us a little historical fact before we hop off.
I don't know. I have to guess it. Probably late 1800s, I think, is when the telephone was first invented. But I don't want to say like if I'm wrong, I'm gonna look like a complete asshole. I'm fucking. That's okay.
Yeah,
that's
but
right.
give us the story of Ahoy Hoy.
Oh, so the greeting we all say when we pick up the phone is hello, right? That's what we always say. But Alexander Graham Bell, when he invented the telephone, he actually wanted to be ahoy hoy, and ahoy hoy was like meant hello, like for earlier times, right? People said hello back then as well, but ahoy hoy was even earlier than that. And so he actually wanted everybody to say ahoy hoy. So that first telephone call made, he called his like assistant, whatever, in the other room, and he said like, "Come on in here, I need your help," or something like that. I can't figure the exact words he used. Something like, I was like, "Guy, I need you now," or something like that. I think like that was the first words he ever used. But he always advocated people to say ahoy hoy instead of hello when they answered the phone. But for whatever reason, it just never took. But we joked about calling this episode ahoy hoy just because it's like the first episode, the first thing you say, and ahoy hoy.
I think I prefer ahoy hoy. I think it's just cool. Cool.
I actually kind of like it better than hello, to be honest with you. I think it's actually kind of interesting. What's funny is like you might have heard of it because it actually was a joke on The Simpsons when Montgomery Burns picked up the phone and said ahoy hoy. It was on one episode like back in the mid '90s, which was a nod to I think it was to Alexander Graham Bell as his request for ahoy hoy to be the thing. Because back then there was only like a few people using the phone, and maybe Montgomery Burns was old enough to do it. I don't fucking know, but.
the days before the burners. Well, this is Knowledge Drop by Chad, version 1.0.
Version 0.0 probably.
0, yeah.
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 All right. Well, all right. Thank you all for joining the first episode. Please, follow us on Twitter. We'll probably create a Discord too, just to kind of start creating a community there. I think we actually even talked about that yet, you and I, but we'll probably just create.
You're in Slack or Discord? Which one are you?
Discord it, dude. Slack's too expensive.
Okay.
Like the crypto's in Discord, right? Like
yeah,
that's the thing. It's like everybody in crypto's on Discord. That's the place to do it. Like, what are we, a business? Are we like a 9 to 5 fucking corporate America thing? Then we'd be Slack.
Yeah, dude. Maybe we should be. Like, maybe that would make it better.
I don't want to shell out the fucking thousands of dollars it would cost to run a Slack channel on this thing.
I feel like after this podcast, I'm just going to become like a compliance officer in Web 2. I'm just going to implement like NIST 853. I'm going to lose all hope and I'm going to be like, God damn it, those people that just sit on their ass and fucking do nothing, maybe they actually understand that like doing the basics well. Yeah. We're just going in circles now, so let's just end this shit.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Follow us on Twitter. Join us in the Discord because we're not fucking doing Slack. Just fuck that shit. And we'll be doing an episode hopefully in a couple weeks. If you have any ideas or suggestions of like what project we should cover or why, please hit us up on the Twitter or the Discords. We'd be happy to listen to it, and we'll be deciding between Preston and I which things we're going to be covering.
Yeah.
Cool. Bye,
Cheers,
everybody.
guys.
Cheers.